that collected answers from people who are doing digital humanities. As you can see, the blog post stopped at 818 lines. And that was a few years ago already, but I like to show that because you can just assume that the more people engage in digital humanities, the more people have a definition of what is digital humanities. And only recently, a more critical voice, if you want, suggested that digital humanities seems as a hodgepodge of methods, approaches, and disciplines, perspectives bound together more by individualized understanding of both digital and humanities rather than by a common objective of practice. So that can be one way of looking at digital humanities, and I'm putting it here because indeed digital humanities is a very emerging field that has, I would say, affects all kinds of disciplines and methodologies in the humanities. If I would to offer a working proposition or a working definition of digital humanities, I would say that digital humanities is the use of computational tools and methods for enhancing traditional humanistic study. And that's one part of the definition. The other one is alongside the development of new research questions and methods in the humanities. What does that mean, actually? It means that we will gain access through the use of these computational tools and methods. We will gain access not only to new data and new methods, but also to new questions that could not have been asked before, giving us, of course, new knowledge, but also, and that's another point I want to really stress here, new modes of doing research. What does it mean? It means that unlike much of the research that is done in the traditional humanities, thinking about digital humanities brings forth ideas like working in a collaborative environment, like a lab. I like to think of my work as being done in a lab, in a laboratory, much like the life sciences, being done much more in real time. So once you enter the computational tools, I'm not saying that everything is very quick in using the computational tools, but the results that you get give you this kind of feedback that makes all the work much more dynamic and in real time. So these are some of the aspects that take place or that come out of this definition of digital humanities. Now, just a few words about how did the field emerge, and I like to present. I like in my presentations to present several beginnings to show you how diverse the field was from its infancy. So one of the, if you want, the founding fathers, actually a father, Roberto Busa, a Jesuit priest, by some sort of a sheer coincidence of a friendship with IBM CEO in the 1950s, even earlier than that, just as World War II ended, began doing the index Thomisticus, the index of Thomas Aquinas' works. You can see here in the picture the punch card of IBM machines, and really it was one of the first times that the computational tools were harnessed in order to expand our knowledge, to expand the data that we have at hand, or even, if I can say it in a more revolutionary way, to really think of humanistic work like the works of Thomas Aquinas through a data-driven lens. Another, maybe the Israeli equivalent or the Jewish Israeli equivalent is the Responsa Project, Project AFHU, the question and answers from the Hebrew sages that is currently run by the Bar Ilan University. I know that not all of you read Hebrew, but here on the side you have a small archive clip from an Israeli newspaper from 1967, 2 months after the Six-Day War, that talks about how a computer will make us an index of the Jewish halacha. Okay, so that's another example of how these things really emerge, not a decade later, when in decades in proximity, in 2 different parts of the world, but driven by very similar tendencies. The last thing that I want to show in terms of beginnings is my own personal beginning. As a Stanford alumna, I had the honor to study with Professor Franco Moretti, a professor of English literature. And Franco Moretti is very much the founding father of this, what we call the distant reading. Now, what is a distant reading? Franco Moretti argued, and I will use it as a metaphor when I move forward to showing you my project in the next slide, that instead of reading the, 100, 200,000 books that literary scholars read, we can, and not only can, we ought to also read much larger, the entire archive of books. Why? Because we can. Today, with the Gutenberg project, the Ben Yehuda project in Israel, or on Jewish writings, or many other archives that are available, not to mention Google Books, of course, and other enterprises like that, we can really access much more than what we call the canon, just the masterpieces of the time. And of course, we can't read it with our eyes. So what we do is that we allow the computer to read it. And I like to use Franco Moretti's quote here, that we do a little pact with the devil. We know how to read text from a close reading perspective, he means, reading as scholars of humanities do. But now let's learn how not to read them. Now, this not to read them, of course, is a very tricky thing. I assume that you can already understand the revolution that it created in the field of literary studies and cultural studies altogether. And I'm trying to harness these insights and these tools and bring it to the study of Holocaust testimonies. Now, as the introduction was very kindly presented me, my research engages with the phenomenon of mass atrocity, beginning with the Holocaust and moving on to more current affairs. Unfortunately, we never run out of mass atrocity in our world. And my question is, how can we listen to all the voices that give testimony? And here I want to take you to the world of Holocaust memory. I will do it through a research that I'm conducting, I'm just now conducting, in the sense that I literally had a conversation with my programmer about one of the figures that I'm going to show you a few hours ago. So it's really a work in the making, and I want to walk you through that to show you what I'm trying to do with these computational tools in order to think about not only about how do we listen to voices of the past, but also how do we make sure and guarantee that the future of memory of the Holocaust memory stays alive. So the Eichmann trial, I'm not going to say much about the Eichmann trial in terms of historical context, since we have a very limited amount of time, but the Eichmann trial took place in Jerusalem in 1961. Eichmann was a very well-known and high-ranking, relatively, Nazi officer, very much in charge on all the transportations of the Jews to the death camps, and much more than that. He was caught in Argentina, brought to Israel, kidnapped to Israel, and was put on trial. And you can see here all the famous parts of this trial. So you have here the defendant in the glass booth that was constructed specifically for him, and the three judges. Judge Lando is sitting as the Chief Justice, and that was the scene of the trial. Now, what we know mainly about the Eichmann trial is about how it really changed the understanding of Holocaust in Israel, and I think very much globally. And what we remember is very much the testimonies, the witnesses that participated in the trial. Just to give you a little bit of the numbers, or maybe I will set the scene like that. In the Nuremberg Tribunal, there were hardly any witnesses. The Nuremberg Tribunal, 1945, 1946, the Allies putting on trial the leadership of the Nazi criminals, and hardly any hardly any witnesses, any victims coming to testify, because the idea was that we want to, as Robert Jackson said, the chief American prosecutor, we want to prove incredible events with credible evidence. All this evidence was standing before the Israeli prosecutor's office when they pressed charges against Eichmann, meaning that Eichmann could have been very much convicted based on documentary evidence. Nevertheless, the decision of Chief Prosecutor Hausner, the Israeli Chief Prosecutor, was to bring testimonies that will really tell the story of the Holocaust, from the very early persecutions to the ghettoization, through the transport, deportation, the camps, the concentration camps, and the death camps. Now, if I would have asked you if it had been an open seminar and you could have raised your hand, I would have asked you who are the most important voices, or the voices that you remember by knowledge, first-hand knowledge, or from the cultural memory of the Holocaust that we all share in a way. I can bet that you would have given me at least the name of this person, Katsetnik, the very famous Holocaust writer, who quite ironically didn't really voice his testimony because he fainted on the witness stand. If I had more time, I could have shown you the clip, but I tell you all the clips from the testimonies of the Eichmann trial are on YouTube, and it's on YouTube in a dedicated YouTube channel, and it's a fascinating watch. So Kasetnik fainted a few minutes into his testimony, as his testimony talked about the planet of Auschwitz, that it was a different planet. The other guy that I assume you would have mentioned maybe is Abba Kovner, who spoke at length until the judges really pleaded with him, please, Mr. Kovner, give us facts, not propaganda, talking about the heroism of the partisans. Another figure that you may have mentioned, if you're really maybe more knowledgeable about the Eichmann trial, and I'm not saying it, I'm saying it with the full respect of all the people around me that are learned of the, with the facts of the Eichmann trial, is Tzvi Lobotkin, who was in the ghetto, in the Warsaw ghetto, and participated in the uprising. These are only 3 witnesses. In the Eichmann trial, we had almost 100 witnesses. Most of them, 90% of them, were direct Holocaust survivors, so victims that came and spoke. But we don't seem to remember them. More than that, we don't seem to even know who they were. And I'm giving you here just, snapshots of some of them. But do any of you heard about the story of Rivka Yostolevska, who was put in front of a firing pit and was shot with her daughter in her hands? Her daughter died, and she somehow climbed off the death pit. And we don't know of her story. Of course, if you are scholars of the Eichmann trial, one of the several that are, you would have read her testimony. But what do we do with all these voices that are going, I'm sorry to say this, but to die again in the archive? And here is when I'm starting to talk about also the future of Holocaust memory. As we're reaching, the second decade of the 21st century, we don't have many living survivors anymore. As a kid growing up in Israel, every Holocaust Memorial Day, I would meet a survivor. We would meet a survivor that would come and share their personal story. We don't have that anymore. The people that, were kids in the Holocaust are now 90. We're really in a decade, we lose any living memento of the Holocaust. And that's why it's so important to start thinking about the future of Holocaust memory. And then the question is, how do we listen to all these voices in the archive? Now, the case of the Eichmann trial is a relatively easy one because, as I said, we only had 100 witnesses. 100 witnesses is something that if you're very diligent, you can sit and read through. It's not an easy read. I'm telling you this from personal experience. For my PhD work that was completely analog and traditional, I read, of course, through all the transcripts of the Eichmann trial. It's a long read and it's a very horrific read. You read story after story after story with all the gory details. It's really scarring. And I don't see many people doing that. And that's only the Eichmann trial. Just imagine that in the Yale archive, for example, the Fortune of Yale archive, you have more than 5,000 testimonies. And in the archive in University of South California, the Spielberg archive, as it's called, you have more than 50,000 testimonies. How will we remember the stories of these witnesses if we don't start using different means than just reading with our eyes? So that's exactly where I bring together the insights from Digital Humanities and from Franco Moretti's distant reading into what I call a distant listening model, listening to the stories of the victims. And I want to walk you through how exactly I do that and share with you some of the examples and see what we can learn out of this. I'm going to just briefly introduce the methodology I'm using. I'm not expecting you, of course, to be first with the algorithmic modeling, but the approach that I'm using is called topic modeling. What does topic modeling do? Topic modeling basically sorts through a large corpus of documents, and it identifies the latent or the hidden topics in the corpus. If I just give you a very brief example, if you would take the New York Times and you just stack together all the articles from the New York Times in the last 10 years, okay? If I run a topic modeling on this corpus of all the documents of the New York Times, we can assume that the algorithm of this, which is called latent Dirichlet allocation, will find me words that are most likely, probability-wise, come together that revolve around topics, for example, such as politics, partisan, the Congress, the Democrats, the Republicans. I would assume that it will find me a topic about sports. If I ask for more topics, maybe the sports topic will be split into an NBA topic, I don't know, the football topic. I'm not strong at sports, I'm sorry. But the idea is that it doesn't tell me that's the sports topic. What the topic modeling does, and that's really important, is to just give me a list of words that are most likely to come together in a document. If I stick to the New York Times example, then it will give me a list of words that has to do with NBA. And then it is my job as the domain expert, the interpreter, the scholar to say, that's a topic about NBA. If I'm an avid reader of the New York Times, I would recognize. Now I'm telling you all that after I did such an experiment. And one of the topics that I really liked about the topic modeling of the New York Times is a topic that has words that have to do with, I'm giving you the list of words now from my head. It's words that have to do with Mr., Mrs., graduated, wedding, and such words. And you can understand, if you're familiar with this column as much as I do, that it's about the newly wedded couples with the vows of marriage that they post every Sunday on the newspaper. So a topic basically is a cluster of words with a high probability to appear together in a document. And the nice thing about the LDA algorithm is that every document can be composed from several topics. So, for example, if an NBA player got married and it was in both columns, both in the sports and in the wedding column, then it can be comprised of these two topics: the topic that I will term wedding topic and the topic that I will term the NBA topic. The advantages of that is that it's an unsupervised method. What does it mean? It means that I do not impose my bias or my worldview on the data. I don't tell my algorithm, the machine, please find me topics on politics, NBA, and wedding. I'm allowing it to just scroll through my documents and tell me what are these clusters of words for me to interpret them as a topic. What's important about that is that when I reach a corpus that is so charged with meaning and interpretation as the Eichmann trial, it gives me a fresh view on documents that are very well researched in the past. Why was it important for me in my own specific research on the Eichmann trial? Well, one of the claims about the Eichmann trial, as I mentioned a little bit before, is that we didn't need the testimony of the victim. It wasn't needed, legally speaking, in order to prove Eichmann's guilt. And that made me think, can I, in some computational means, find a way to see this exact claim, if you want? Is it a claim that is, axiomatic about the Eichmann trial, that, the voices of the victims, as the judges themselves said in their judgment, were just a byproduct of the trial? Or can we maybe find something else to learn about the differences between voices of victims and the official voice of justice? And for that, I ran the topic algorithm on the entire transcript of the Eichmann trial, including the judgment, which was read in the court session. So I took the entire court session of the Eichmann trial, and I'm going to show you now the word cloud of the topics that came out. Don't be alarmed, we'll walk through that slowly. What you see here are my 10 topics of the Eichmann trial. I set the number of the topics, so I could have chosen 20 or 30. The reason I chose 10 is that is the number of topics in which I saw a consistent core topics coming back again and again. Since it's a probabilistic, it's not a question of counting words, it's a probability algorithm, then I needed to make sure that I get valid results. At 10 topics, I kept getting the same topics that showed to me or proved to me that these are the core topics of my corpus. Now, I want to walk through some of these topics. As you can see, I don't get a name for the topic. So what my job is now, as a scholar of the Holocaust, as a scholar of testimony, or as the scholar of mass atrocity that I am, is to try and make sense of why did my algorithm tell me that these words in any of these word clouds make up a topic, a cluster of words that has some semantic meaning to it. Now, I want to say a few words about this word cloud. The word cloud is just a visualization with the 10 or 20 most important words in each of the topics, okay? And the bigger the word is, the more prevalent it is within this cluster of words, which we call topics. Now, if, for example, I will choose an easy topic to begin with, we look at topic 8, which is the 9th topic, because in computational lingo, we begin with 0 for some reason, and I just kept the convention going. So topic 0 is the first topic, and so on. So topic number 8, the penultimate topic. If you can see here, you see words that make up like crime, section, law, Nazi, international, and law, act, Israel, indictment. These are words that comprise the world, the semantic world of the indictment of Eichmann, or if you want, the legal framework that governs the trial of Eichmann. So that's a relatively easy and intuitive topic. If you look to topic number 9, for example, you can see here a topic that deals very much with the jury, the Hungarian jury. Again, one of the biggest affairs in the Eichmann trial was the affair of the deal to rescue the Hungarian Jews, in which Eichmann was personally involved. So it was one of the only cases in which Eichmann was actually involved, not as the mastermind behind the bureaucratic annihilation, but actually was involved in person in the negotiations. If we look at another topic, and in that I will conclude by 2 more graphs, and then I will open it to your questions, but I want to show you something very touching to me that I got out of the results. So if you look now at topics, maybe it would be easier if I will just show you how I did the naming process for a second on all the topics. So you can see here that there is a court procedure topic, submit, statement, material, a topic about Nazi bureaucracy, so Reich, police, ministry, area, okay? A topic about negotiations. Now, I have to admit that some of the topics are not as clear-cut as the topic number 8, which is the legal indictment for a second. For example, if you see topic number 7, it's very much about the Eichmann statement to Inspector Avner Less. You see here the word less very much bold, and tape and part and statement. So I called it the Eichmann statement in general. And I want to focus our attention for a second on 3 topics. Topic number 4, 5, and 6. Topic number 4 really brings to life, if you want, the tragedy of the Poland jury. You have here all the combination of the words together. Now imagine it's a computer, and if it wasn't clear, I want to stress it. The computer, the machine, doesn't know anything about the Eichmann trial. It's not a supervised learning in the sense that it went to Wikipedia, learned, keywords from the Eichmann trial, nothing. What it has, it's only the words of the trial. And from the words of the trial and this probabilistic learning process that the algorithm does, it managed to put together all the aspects of Poland jury. From the streets in Warsaw, okay, that is the main city, and the ghetto, child, life, Auschwitz, group, resistance, children, people, city, ghetto, of course. You can see here all the dynamics of the moving into the streets, into the ghetto, in the city, the children that were very much an active part in the ghetto of going in and out, the death, the resistance, of course, the Warsaw Uprising. Now I want to take you to two other topics and show you how amazingly well the algorithm not only succeeded in putting words that really make sense together, but also in giving us 2 different voices, 2 different perspectives on the same topic. Topic 5 and 6, and even if you ignore the labeling that I gave them, deal with the question of the death camp. In both of them, you see the word Auschwitz, okay? In both of them, you see words like barrack, gas. You have here also the word gas. You have here the word annihilation. You have here the department of Eichmann. You have here the words block and happened and said and night and train. Now, again, if I had asked you what is the difference between these 2 topics, they clearly both speak about the the murder of the Jews, you would see the topic number 5 expresses the perspective of the perpetrators. That's a very highly bureaucratic topic. Now, it has also the words final and solution. And that's why I chose to call it the final solution. Final solution, of course, is not a term that was known to the Jews, definitely not the Jews that were sent to their death. It was a Nazi term for what was done to the Jews. Topic number 6, on the other hand, gives you the perspective of the victim. Just look at the words, and maybe I should say it right now, although the Eichmann trial was translated to English in an official translation, I use the Hebrew because I'm interested in really listening to how the witnesses express themselves. Of course, that also needs to be, we need to make a reservation here because, of course, some of the witnesses spoke in different languages. So I use the official Hebrew. And here you see, for example, we were, you saw, people, into, remember, picture, barrack, I saw, happen. You see the activity, the present tense in which, or the past tense that they tell about the present activities in which these stories were told. It's from a first person perspective, a second person perspective, they, we, I, and you can really feel how the victims are the ones that, give her their perspective. And I have a few more slides, but I think that I will stop here because I really want to hear your questions. And if during the questions some of it will come up, then I can share with some more. But I think we have enough rich material here to see how through using a computational means, we can learn so much about the dynamics between a perpetrator perspective, a legal perspective, a victim's perspective, that all dwell together within the Eichmann trial.
Terrific. Thank you so much. For those of you who do have questions, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom. We do have a few that we will get started with. Can you see the questions there?
Maybe I'll stop my sharing.
Okay. So the first question, I'll go ahead and read it, is from Andre Goodfried. Data-driven humanities and remembrance implies that data and IT-based analytical tools should direct our humanities focus. However, humanities, by its very nature, implies our focus should be human-driven rather than data-driven. How do we ensure that data is seen only as something which informs rather than drives our Holocaust remembrance?
I could not have agreed with that more. Really, I don't see the computational means in any way replacing the human engagement with the materials. I think that even from the very small examples that I gave here, you can see how I would not have been able to make any informed interpretation about the results of the model without having the knowledge, the human knowledge about the Holocaust. I think from the example between the two topics, that one represents the perpetrator's language and the other the victim's language, if you're not a Holocaust historian, if you're not familiar with the details of the Eichmann trial, you would not have been able to make such an interpretation. So what I see the computational tool is giving us is to really find a way to listen to all the victims, to all the testimonies of the Eichmann trial, grouped together, but grouped together not in the sense that I will turn them into numbers and say, okay, so 5 were from Poland and 3 were from Germany and 2 were from Vienna, because this kind of statistics has been done already. I find them less humanistic than ever before, all the statistical numbering of the testimonies. What I was interested in is, can I listen to the voice of the victim by using computational means? And I think that by showing how this topic cohered around victims' testimony, I showed you, I managed to see what was the core of their trauma, in a sense.
Terrific. Andre has another part to the question, and then we'll go to some of the other folks. Is a value of LDA modeling for Holocaust remembrance, when combined with communication models like agenda setting and uses and gratifications, that it can suggest information about the Holocaust that matches a person's interest, when it seems, based on a person's internet search and reading habits, that something from a Holocaust database is something that would of use to the reader at this particular time, similar to those websites that suggest since you read this, you may also be interested in these related items or topics.
So I hope that I understood the question, but the idea, well, I don't envision yet a search engine based on such a reading. But the idea is that it would really allow, imagine a student 10 years from now who never met a Holocaust survivor in their lifetime because, you know, they were too young, and now really most of the community of survivors have perished, and they need to engage now. They have two options. One option is to choose one story. They can go on Google, they can, you know, look at the testimonies of the AFHU trial on YouTube. They can, if they have access to the database of the 50,000 Holocaust testimonies of the Shoah Foundation, of the Spielberg Foundation, they can do that. But they would only get this one story. Now, I admit, one story, the single story, is highly effective in keeping, and I'm saying the last part of your question, in keeping Holocaust memory on the societal agenda. But what does it do to the memory of all the other people? The most humanistic thing to do is to take one testimony and listen really carefully in what we call a close reading. But it's only respectful and respective of this one particular testimony that we chose, randomly or not, to read. And if I'm interested in a more global understanding of the stories that are hidden there in the archive, imagine that we can do, for example, a topic modeling of the entire 50,000 testimonies and start seeing if there are testimonies that are more representative of a children's memory of the Holocaust, or the gender-based, you know, a female or a male remembrance of the Holocaust. And you can do that by you know, matching the metadata that we have on the testimonies with these clusters. I think that's where the future of study, at least of research, lies when we think about the future of Holocaust memory.
Great. Two-part question from Karen Orlin. The term annihilation appears in cluster 5, but is the title you assigned to cluster 6. Why? And how can you prevent digitizing the experience of Holocaust from removing emotion and individual perspectives, i.e. the humanity of the experience?
So I have to admit that that's a very, I'm starting with the second part of the question, and that's a very important aspect of criticism that I often meet. The fear that by digitizing these voices, I'm losing touch with them. And my only answer, again and again, very consistently throughout my research, is that otherwise we won't remember any of these voices. From my experience, most people did not listen, read, or engage with any Holocaust testimony, unless it's being brought to them actively to schools or universities. They don't, and we're going to lose touch with these live voices. So the question is, how will we remember? And if our only way to remember is by somehow enshrining these voices through the computational platforms, I think that's already something. Now, I want to say something again about why I chose, and maybe I skipped it when, you know, in favor of time and concise, but one of the reasons I like the LDA model to use it on Holocaust testimony is that it doesn't give away, it doesn't lose, if you want, the natural language. So it's a tool that was developed by natural language process engineers. So and the idea is that it doesn't translate or convert the original language that was spoken to numbers or codings or anything like that. And here I relate to the first question that you asked, why did I choose the word annihilation for the second part, although it wasn't used, but it's used in the first part. First of all, I don't think that the Jews that testified in the AFHU trial used the word annihilation. They didn't know they were being annihilated. They just knew that they were dying, and the word death appears there. The word annihilation is already, and you're very much right about that, is already my imposition. And here again is my bias. I gave you the word annihilation, but now based on your reaction, I'm telling myself now, maybe I should label it differently. Maybe I should just label it victim stories or victim's death. And I'm being very honest here, but what very important for me is the transparency that exists, because you see the words. And here, you just now confronted me and told me, hey, look, you don't have this word. Why did you impose your bias on that, or your, your perspective on that? And that's precisely what I appreciate so much about LDA. It gives the reader, the critic, the reviewer, the person engaging in conversation with my research, the ability to say, I disagree. But the data is still there. The language of the victims is still there, and we can argue about the interpretation of it.
Terrific. A question from Michael Sperling. How big a corpus did you deal with? How many documents and how much text were subjected to the LDA?
That's a very good question. I'm sorry that I skipped some of these technical parts. I'm very happy to engage in them. So the corpus was comprised from 116 sessions based on the sessions that were in the Eichmann trial. Each of the sessions is pretty much in the same length. The number of words I have to say here that is a little tricky, because you have more than a million words in general, but it went through a very rigorous process, rigorous work of pre-processing, in which you do lemmatization, you take off the stop words, the most frequent words, stuff like that. So the corpus is very much diminished. And then based on this cleaned corpus, you train the algorithm. But the original corpus is all of the Eichmann trial, the transcripts as they exist in the Ministry of Justice website, which is open to anyone if you want.
Great. A question from Kenneth Tartoff. Is it possible to relate your 10 or more groups to each other in order to understand how each relates to each other?
So, if I do a small share screen again, I want to show you another graph that I have. I think it would be an interesting addition. As I told you, one of the questions that interests me was the gap between what the victim spoke about and what the judgment spoke about. So here I showed you, when I showed you this, you see my screen? You see my presentation? Good. So here I showed you how I interpreted, for example, topic number 5 and 6 as relating to different groups. But what I did also, I'll skip that. What I did here is to compare what are the topics, okay? What are the most prominent topics in the victim group. So I took all the victim testimonies together and grouped them. All the testimony of the Eichmann, the defendant himself, spoke for several court sessions. So I grouped them together again, as if he's, speaking differently in each of these meetings. And then lastly, the judgment. And you can see here very clearly how these topics relate, in the sense that they cluster differently for each of the the identity groups, the speaker groups. So for example, if you look at the victims, the most prominent topics among the victims are the topic of negotiations. For example, topic number 2, which is green in here, topic number 3, which is the deportation, and topic number 4, the Poland jury, and so forth, and you can see that. And indeed, topic number 6. Now, of course, I did that after I named the topics. And I believe that it supports the interpretation that I gave you. If you go to Eichmann, for example, you see that Eichmann very much speaks the language of Nazi bureaucracy, okay, and the language of the final solution, the two most prominent topics. Topic number 9 is also very prominent with Eichmann, because he used it to say, look, I tried to negotiate with the Hungarian Jews. I tried to save them. Okay, he tried to use it to support his argument, and that goes the same way for topic number 2. So you can see here how these topics are not just spread, in these 10 topics world, but they really cluster together based on what is the identity of the speakers. If you look, for example, on the topic of the judgment, you can see the topic number 2, the negotiations, which was mainly used by Eichmann, you can see here, but also by some of the victims, doesn't interest the court at all, because it's not about his guilt, it's not about his actions, it's a context, if you want, but it doesn't interest the court at all. And of course, very, as one may expect, the language of the legal indictment, the words that comprise the topic of the legal indictment, and the words that are part of that in here. I just want to give you as an example the topic of the court procedure, which I would have expected to see here, is actually much higher in these two groups of the Eichmann, the defendant, and the victims. And the reason for that, I think, is that I didn't clear completely the questions of the judges from the testimonies of each of the speakers. And so I think this expresses actually really the court procedure, which we won't find in the final judgment, but is actually part and parcel of the process of the trial, because it's words that have to do with statement and you know, document and bring me this. Just imagine how a trial, a criminal trial moves on. But here you really see how this, you know, how these words relate to one another.
We have time just for a few more questions. From Jim Marshall, will this database be open to the wider internet public?
Oh, okay, that's a wonderful question. There is no database in here. I have to make it clear. I did not create any new database. All of the corpus is, as I said, it's open in the internet website of the Ministry of Justice and in the Nizkor project, N-I-Z-K-O-R, that posted or loaded to the internet the official translation. I did not create any database. I did manipulation, and of course, as you see, I'm presenting it, and it's part of an article that I'm writing, and there is a GitHub repository with the code, but it's all a question of programming. It's not an analysis. It's not a question of creating new data in the way that we think of in the humanities.
Great. If the transcripts were read in Hebrew, how are the results of the algorithm translated into English? And also, and also related from Miriam's, have to digitize the written documents first?
So these are excellent questions that really have to do with the amount of really hard labor that was done before you could get these very nifty results. I mean, the code itself, the analysis takes really half an hour. Bringing all the materials to be cleaned, pre-processed, and ready for the analysis is 90% of the work. And you can ask any programmer and data scientist that work with the most, advanced neural networks out there of artificial intelligence. 90% of the time, effort, and work is being done by preparing the materials. So I did not have, luckily, to digitize the written documents. They were already in PDF format, even a readable PDF format, but which saved me a lot of time. I didn't need to scan them and all that. But I did have to do a lot of conversion process and cleaning process. And the translation is mine. Maybe I should have mentioned that. The translation is mine, but as I said, I used the official translation in order to keep the terminology the same. But I really prefer to do my analysis in Hebrew and translate the results than to analyze, the English in advance, out of my, my interest in the material and the language.
From Susan Brooks, does the process reveal any new perspectives, new or overlooked approaches?
That's a fantastic question. So usually when you present this kind of research in academic, conferences, they say, okay, so what's the wow effect? Like, what was the big deal? And I have to say that there is no such a big deal here. I think that the promise or the potential of this methodology is to help us think of ways to engage with such a material in the future. In terms of the Eichmann trial, I have to admit that it's really hard to say something new about the Eichmann trial today. So much has been written about it, from an analog or traditional perspective. It is interesting to think of ways to empirically show what scholars up until now said mostly out of intuition or more based on a close reading. I would have maybe very much liked to show that the victims indeed did influence the judges, but it's not the case, and the data doesn't lie, so I can't make this argument, even though it would have made the article much more promising. But I do think that if we think, as I said, about Holocaust memory in general, such an approach holds the potential for opening new avenues for engaging with these voices.
Great. And our last question from Betta Cohn. Thank you for a fascinating talk. The USC Shoah Foundation digitizes its testimony so that students and scholars can easily search for a specific topic ranging from geography to emotion. What are the pros and cons of your approach to theirs?
That's a wonderful question, and that's precisely the difference between an unsupervised and supervised search. As a student, I can go, well, first of all, the USC Shoah Foundation is not, you have to get into a specific terminal and all these kind of things, but that's very much fine. But you search according to keywords that they already tagged, and they do a wonderful job of tagging, as you mentioned here, from geography to emotions to silences, cries, so not only text but also gestures, and they tag every 30 seconds. It's really, it's an amazing work. It's it's amazing, but they already tagged it. And my interest is in finding out what happens when I let the computer do this kind of clustering. So I can approach their database and say, give me all the materials that you have about Nazi bureaucracy, final solution, whatever, and it will do that. But what happens if I want to do this unsupervised search, an exploratory search that tells me, that allows me to ask, did I miss out on something? Is there a topic there that somehow your wonderful coding sheet did not cover and we completely missed out? And maybe such a topic will emerge. And I'm doing now such a research on the Yale testimony corpus, which is much, smaller, the Fortune of New Haven Yale testimony project. And I hope, I don't know, maybe next year I will be able to tell you something different about it. But and that's mainly my contribution to the field, really trying to bring a fresh view on existing materials.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for a great Q&A and presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Sam Rank, who will provide a few closing remarks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, Dr. Keydar, for an interesting discussion. My name is Sam Rank, and I am also a member of AFHU LEAD, zooming in from the Washington, D.C. metro area. I hope that you enjoyed today's presentation. As Chad mentioned, AFHU LEAD is a groundbreaking training program that addresses the long-term leadership needs of AFHU through cultivation of promising new leaders. From US-based leadership training programs to a week-long trip to Israel, LEAD helps to shape the future of AFHU and Hebrew University. AFHU has a whole series of webinars on a variety of topics, as many of us are sheltering in place and looking for enriching and informative programming for both our intellect and our souls. To sign up for future webinars and to learn how you can get more involved with AFHU or LEAD, please visit afhu.org. Thanks again, be safe, and have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.